Well, basically, the drug doesn't work. How should I put it? Let's see. I'm just thinking about if I should stream about this or not. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if I have time to write a full paper on this or not, but let me see what it would look like. So, why INmune stock will. This is not going to be published. I'm just using it to organize my thoughts. INmune is trying to develop a TNF-alpha mutated protein, which dampens TNF-alpha signaling. They've tried developing it in cancer, and now they're doing an Alzheimer's phase 2 clinical trial. Mindful. Mindful will fail. Why? TNF-alpha is not really relevant in Alzheimer's. In fact, you could easily make the case that TNF-alpha is protective in Alzheimer's, and their drug will hurt people or make it worse. I'm typing like Trump right now. Why? Let's see. There are not much data to go off of, or much data available to scrutinize. Phase 1 data were done very poorly. There was no control group or placebo. Instead, INmune did a 0.3 mg per kg, 0.6 mg per kg, and 1.0 mg per kg dose arms. I'm just going to summarize my thesis, okay? This data was never published or released in full, but it was very bad. The 1.0 mg per kg group, which INmune thinks did well, did not do so well. The cytokine panel they revealed showed that inflammatory cytokines barely changed over the course of taking the drug. Okay. What's weirder is that the lower dose groups had data which was all over the place, even though their dosing is relatively close to 1.0 mg per kg. There are a few questions here. Does this drug get into the brain, for example? It's not clear. TNF-alpha, it's not clear. It's also not even clear what this drug's half-life is. TNF-alpha has a very short half-life, principally because it's internalized upon binding to the TNFR1 receptor. this drug doesn't internalize, at least we don't think. So it might stick around the bloodstream a bit longer, but we really don't know. Nevertheless, the company decided to dose once weekly. It's not clear if this PK will work. Because the drug doesn't bind the TNF-alpha receptor, it's not obvious how it would internalize across the BBB in the first place. This would leave all of the CNS TNF-alpha intact. But is TNF-alpha bad? The immune hypothesis of Alzheimer's can be interpreted to mean that every cytokine and inflammatory molecule, I guess, released by microglia or astrocytes are toxic. But there are data that show you need TNF-alpha in the brain. Alzheimer's is fundamentally a disease of insoluble and cluttered amyloid. It's not surprising that TNF-alpha is slightly increased along with other inflammatory cytokines. Stopping TNF-alpha, even if that is what's happening here, won't stop the other pathways. In fact, it may ramp those up through basic autocrine biology. This might be why you don't see an impressive response in the cytokine panel the company lauded. Yeah, the trial is too small to detect a difference. But here's the more important thing. These are all mechanistic questions, which, in my experience, is largely hard to parse and see through to the clinic. I've only been doing this for 25 years, but that's what I have found. More interesting data comes from outside the company. There's a hypothesis that TNF-alpha inhibitors, when given to Alzheimer's patients, results in less dementia. This was a retrospective observation. Others have failed to replicate it repeatedly. But those were retrospective observations. Those were observations of healthcare data. It would be great if someone did a clinical trial to test this hypothesis. Well, it actually was done. The group tested TNF-alpha against placebo, or DMARDs, I forget, in patients with RA, the exact population that gave rise to this stupid idea in the first place. It showed there was no change. in dementia. That alone should tell you the case is closed. There was also a study of etanercept versus placebo. That failed too. Then, if you examine around 7 trials of anti-inflammatory drugs, ranging from including the TNF pathway and then some steroids, or including some of the TNF pathway, NSAIDs, COX-2, or including quite a bit of it, every single one of those studies failed too. In fact, many of them showed harm. In multiple sclerosis, which is somewhat adjacent to Alzheimer's, TNF-alpha accelerates disease. What's up, Snaking? So the only way to be bullish on this is through the following mental gymnastics. The INmune drug is not like Enroll. It works by inhibiting TNF-alpha in a subtly different way. That way is so important that everything we know about TNF-alpha and Alzheimer's completely changes. TNF-alpha for example, also signals through TNFR2. So this is thought to be less relevant than TNFR1, and a lot of data contradicts this, but INmune's drug spares TNFR2 binding. So TNFR2 can still do its thing. That thing is theoretically good, but no one can really seem to explain it. And the cytokine data don't make sense anyway. And again, there's lots of conflicting evidence. But that's basically the drug can somehow get into the brain through an unclear way, and it's a large enough amount to work, inhibiting a cytokine that is not really relevant to the disease. All of this is against a trial which is only 6 months long and very underpowered. So, even though an 18-month study showed that TNF-alpha inhibition doesn't work for Alzheimer's, this drug in a small 6-month study will work because it allows TNFR2 to work, the good part of TNF, but stops TNF-alpha, TNFR1 signaling, the bad part of TNF, from working. That's the thesis. it's easier to just see reality clearly. TNF-alpha is one of thousands of immune and inflammatory proteins in the brain. There's a lot going on in Alzheimer's. The foolish bull thinks that TNF-alpha is the key to the door that is locked in Alzheimer's. The reality is that TNF-alpha is one key to a locker room full of lockers with tons of key locks. There's no way to know which one molecule is relevant. TREM2, a very thoroughly studied molecule with plenty of smart people pointing to it as relevant. In fact, TREM2 mutations can cause Alzheimer's. Still don't work. We just don't know much about Alzheimer's. The brain can't drain insoluble or even soluble amyloid. We see inflammation. That's probably a good thing. If we didn't, and let the brain grow with these plaques, I think there'd be more damage done to synapses than without the inflammation. Homeostasis of the innate immune system is not a small thing. Dendritic cells complement IL-1, IL-10, IL-18, IL-2, IL-6. All of these and more, gamma delta, T cells, all of these and more respond quickly in Alzheimer's. Stopping one is like, I need a good analogy. Oh yeah, this is my favorite biotech analogy. It's like blocking the traffic on Fifth Avenue. You can just go down Madison or 6th. They actually go the different direction, but that's the point. All the cars will just make a right and get to where they're going. I'm talking about just innate. I think I more or less nailed it. What do you think? Snaking. Let me read it again. Why INmune stock will drop 90% very soon. INmune is trying to develop a TNF-alpha mutein, which is a mutated protein, which dampens TNF-alpha signaling. They've tried developing it in cancer, and now they're doing it in Alzheimer's phase 2 trial, Mindful. Mindful will fail. Why? TNF-alpha is not relevant in Alzheimer's. In fact, you can make the case that TNF-alpha is protective in Alzheimer's, and their drug will hurt people or make it worse. Why? There isn't much data to scrutinize. I got to fill this out a little bit better. Phase 1 data were done very poorly. There was no control group or placebo. INmune did 0.3 mg per kg, 6.6 mg per kg, and 1 mg per kg dose arms. The data were never published or released in full, but it was very bad. The 1 mg per kg group, which INmune thinks did well, did not do so well. Yeah, they definitely did try it in COVID. The cytokine panel they revealed showed that inflammatory cytokines barely changed over the course of taking the drug. But the drug is supposed to work by lowering inflammation. TNF-alpha in and of itself is not dangerous. TNF-alpha is dangerous because it upregulates transcription of other inflammatory molecules. What's weirder is that the lower dose groups had data which was all over the place, even though their dosing was relatively close to 1 mg per kg. There are a few questions here. Does the drug get into the brain? It's not clear. It's also not even clear what this drug's half-life is. TNF-alpha has a very short half-life, principally because it's not internalized, or principally because it is internalized upon binding to the receptor. This drug doesn't internalize, at least we don't think it does. So it might stick around the bloodstream a bit longer, but we really don't know. I think there's a mouse study, but it's not always too valuable. The mouse study is not promising either. It shows like a day half-life, which is fairly bad. Nevertheless, the company decided to dose weekly, once weekly. It's not clear if this PK will work because the drug doesn't bind the TNF-alpha receptor. It's not obvious how it would internalize to cross the blood-brain barrier in the first place. This would leave all of the CNS TNF-alpha intact. I think there's some idea that you could sequester TNF-alpha if it crosses the blood-brain barrier the other way, but you certainly wouldn't stop signaling. But the big question is TNF-alpha bad in the first place? The immune hypothesis interprets that every cytokine, an inflammatory molecule released by microglia and astrocytes, are toxic. But there are data that show that you need TNF-alpha in the brain. Alzheimer's disease is fundamentally a disease of insoluble and cluttered amyloid. It's not surprising that TNF-alpha is slightly increased along with other inflammatory cytokines. So stopping TNF-alpha, even if that's what's happening here, won't stop the other pathways like IL-6. In fact, it may ramp those up because of autocrine biology and homeostasis. This might be why you don't see an impressive response in the cytokine panel that the company lauded. So there's a lot of mechanistic questions, but in my experience, it's hard to parse and see these through to the clinic. I've been doing this for 25 years, but that's what I found. The more interesting data comes from outside the company. There's a hypothesis that TNF-alpha inhibitors, when given to Alzheimer's patients, results in less dementia. This came from a retrospective observation. But others have failed to replicate this repeatedly. Those are the observations of healthcare data. It'd be great if somebody did an actual clinical trial to test this hypothesis. Well, there was. A group tested TNF-alpha against placebo, or DMARDs, in patients with RA. This is the exact population that gave rise to this idea in the first place. Sorry, I just want to respond. And so this trial showed that there was no change in dementia. So without any change in dementia, that should tell you that the case is closed. There's also a study of etanercept versus placebo. Well, That failed too. Yeah, me, Jared, doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So if you examine 7 trials of anti-inflammatory drugs, ranging from those that include the TNF pathway and then some steroids, and they include the TNF pathway and then some, like steroids, um, or some that include part of the TNF pathway, like NSAIDs and COX-2, or some that are like very highly overlapped, like P38. Every single one of those studies failed as well, and some of them showed harm. In MS, which is somewhat adjacent to Alzheimer's, TNF-alpha accelerates disease. So the only way to be bullish on this is going through the following mental gymnastics. The INmune drug is not like Enbrel. It works by inhibiting TNF-alpha in a subtly different way. But that way is so important, it's going to change everything we know about TNF-alpha and Alzheimer's. For example, TNF-alpha signals through TNF-R2. It's less relevant than TNF-R1, and a lot of data contradicts this, but let's assume that the drug spares TNF-R2 binding, and so TNF-R2 function is still intact. So this drug will get into the brain, inhibit the cytokine that we don't think is relevant to the disease, and do this in a 6-month trial so that we see cognition changes in a trial that's very underpowered. By allowing TNF-R2 to do its work and stopping TNF-R1 from doing the bad things that it does. That's the thesis. Reality is pretty simple. I think that instead of the mental gymnastics, the simpler explanation is TNF-alpha is just one of thousands of immune and inflammatory proteins in the body. There's a lot going on with Alzheimer's. There's this theory that TNF-alpha is the key to this one singular door that's locked in Alzheimer's when, you know, it's in real orchestra. It's like a cacophony of things going wrong. And there's no way to know which one molecule is relevant. TREM2 is a good example where a lot of people thought it was going to be TREM2, that was going to be the secret molecule that you had to intervene in. And of course, TREM2 failed. TREM2 had a lot, a lot closer of a chance, I'd say, than this drug. So we don't know that much about Alzheimer's. The brain can't deal with the soluble amyloid or even insoluble amyloid, either one. We see inflammation. That's probably a good thing. If we didn't, the brain would, these plaques would just grow and grow, and there'd probably be more damage done to synapses than without the inflammation. Think about it for a second. This is really interesting. Microglia secrete enzymes that can actually cleave amyloid beta and clear it. That's why you and I don't have this problem. As we get older, we do have this problem. So if you stop the inflammation, you stop the body's ability to clear amyloid beta. In fact, I have some data on this that's really interesting. You will increase amyloid beta, 42. You will accelerate the disease. How wild is that? And even if you did stop it, there's homeostasis. The body wants to make it an inflammatory response, it's going to do it. Stopping TNF-alpha is not going to help you. You're still going to have IL-6, IL-1, beta, all the other responses. There's redundancy. So that's why the cytokine panel barely showed any changes at all. I think that's a pretty good thesis. To keep working on it, and find some holes, and I think Regeneron's pipeline kind of sucks. I'd have to rewrite it pretty carefully when I write these papers. pretty slow and make sure that they are right. But I think that's the thumbnail sketch.